Story 16 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 16. Uncle Wiggily and Percival. Now I'm going to tell you, before I forget it, why old dog Percival was crying that time when he came to the little stone house where the hedgehog lived, and where Uncle Wiggily gave him some cherry pie. And the reason Percival was crying was because he had stepped on a sharp stone and hurt his foot. "But I don't in the least mind now," said Percival, after he had eaten about 11 pieces of pie. "My foot is all better." "I should think that cherry pie would make almost anyone better," said the hedgehog, laughing with joy, for he felt better too. "I know some bad boys to whom I'm going to give some cherry pie, and I hope it makes them better. And to think I threw away the good part of the cherries and cooked the stones in the pie. Oh, excuse me while I laugh again." And the hedgehog laughed so hard that he spilled some of the red cherry pie juice on his shirt front, but he didn't care, for he had another shirt. Well, Uncle Wiggily and Percival, the old circus dog, stayed for some days at the home of the hedgehog, and they had cherry pie, or fritters with maple syrup, at almost every meal. Then finally Uncle Wiggily said: "Well, I guess I must travel on. I can't find my fortune here. I must start off to morrow." "And I'll go with you," spoke Percival. "We'll go together, and see what we can find." Well, he and Uncle Wiggily went on together for some time, and nothing happened, except that they met a poor pussy cat without any tail, and Uncle Wiggily gave her some of the pie. And the next day they met a cat and 7 little kittens, and they all had tails, so they had to have some pie, too. But one night, after Percival and Uncle Wiggily had been traveling all day, they came to a deep, dark, dismal woods. "Oh, have we got to go through that forest?" asked the old gentleman rabbit, wrinkling up his ears. I mean his nose. "I guess we have," replied the circus dog. "We may find our fortunes in there." "It is a pretty dark spot to look for money or fortunes," said the rabbit. "The best thing we can do is to look for a place to sleep, and in the morning we will hurry out of the woods." Well, the 2 animal friends started into the grove of trees, and they hadn't gone very far before it got so dark that they couldn't see to go any farther. Oh, but it was black and lonesome, and sort of scary like. And Uncle Wiggily said: "Let's stay here, Percival. We'll make a little bed under the trees to sleep in, and we'll build a fire to keep us warm, and cook a little supper." So Percival thought that would be nice, and soon he and the rabbit had a cheerful little blazing fire, and then it wasn't quite so lonely. Only there was a big owl in the tree, and he kept hollering, "Hoo! Hoo! Hoo!" And Percival thought it meant him, and Uncle Wiggily thought it meant him, and they were rather frightened. So they didn't either of them answer the owl, who kept on calling, "Hoo! Hoo! Hoo!" They were just cooking their supper, and cutting up the cherry pie, and putting it on some oak leaves for plates, and they had picked out a nice, smooth stump for a table, when all of a sudden they heard a voice saying: "Now you make a jump and grab the rabbit, and I'll take the dog. Then we can carry them off to our dens, and that will be the last of them. Get ready now." "Did you hear that?" asked Uncle Wiggily of the circus dog. "Indeed I did," replied Percival. "I wonder if it can be those owls." "It doesn't sound like them," said Uncle Wiggily. "I think it is a bad fox, or maybe 2 of them." And just then they looked off through the woods, and by the light of the fire they saw 2 big, savage, ugly wolves. Oh, how their sharp teeth gleamed in the dancing flames, and how red their tongues were. "Come on, grab 'em both!" cried one savage wolf. "Grab the rabbit and the dog." "Sure, I'm with you," growled the other savage wolf. "Oh, what shall we do, Uncle Wiggily?" asked Percival. "They'll eat us up." "Let me think a minute," said the rabbit. So he thought for maybe half a minute, and then exclaimed: "Oh, I know a good thing to do." "What?" asked Percival. "Say it quickly, Uncle Wiggily, for those wolves are creeping up on us, and it's so dark we can't see to run away." And surely enough, Those wolves were sneaking up with their red tongues hanging out longer than ever, for all the world just as if they had eaten cherry pie. "We must do some funny tricks," exclaimed Uncle Wiggily. "You know how, Percival, for you were once in a circus, and I learned some when I was with the monkey, and with Fido Flip Flop. Do some tricks, and maybe these wolves will feel so good natured that they won't bite us." So brave Uncle Wiggily stood up on one ear and waved his feet in the air. Then he stood on his nose and turned a somersault. Next he went around and around as fast as a pinwheel. And he whistled a funny tune about a little rubber ball that flew into the air, and when it landed on the ground it would not stay down there. But I wish you could have seen the tricks Percival did. He jumped through between Uncle Wiggily's long ears, and he walked on his hind legs and on his front ones. Then he stood on his head, and he made believe he was begging for something to eat, and Uncle Wiggily fed him a carrot and a piece of pie. Then he put a piece of bread on his nose, tossed it up into the air, tossed the bread, I mean, not his nose, and when it came down he caught it and ate it. Oh, it was great! Well, those wolves were too surprised for anything. They had never seen tricks like those. First they smiled a bit, then they smiled some more. Then one laughed. Then the other laughed. And finally, when Uncle Wiggily and Percival took turns jumping over each other's backs, the wolves thought it so funny that they had to lie down on the leaves and roll over and over because they were laughing so hard. And, of course, after that they didn't feel like hurting Uncle Wiggily or Percival. And just then the big alligator came along and chased the wolves away. So the rabbit and the dog had no one to bother them except the alligator. And, as he had just had his supper, he wasn't hungry, so he didn't eat them. So Uncle Wiggily and Percival went to sleep, and so must you. And if the vegetable man brings me a pumpkin jack-o'-lantern with a pink ribbon on the end of the stem, I'll tell you the next story about Uncle Wiggily in a well. End of story 16. Story 17 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 17. Uncle Wiggily in a Well. Well, I didn't get the pumpkin jack-o'-lantern with the pink ribbon on, but someone mailed me an ice cream cone, so it's just as well. That is, I suppose it was an ice cream cone when it started on its journey, but when I got it, there was only the cone part left. Maybe the postman took out the ice cream, with which to stick a stamp on the letter. But there, I must tell you what happened to Uncle Wiggily after he and Percival did those tricks, and made the wolves laugh so hard. The rabbit and the circus dog stayed in the woods all that night, and nothing bothered them. "Now, Percival, you make the coffee, and I'll spread the bread and butter for breakfast," said Uncle Wiggily the next morning. "Where are you going to get the bread and butter?" asked the dog. "Oh, I have it in my satchel," spoke the old rabbit, and surely enough he did have several large, fine slices. So he and Percival ate their breakfast, and then they started off again. They hadn't gone very far before they met a grasshopper, who was limping along on top of a fence rail, and looking quite sad. I mean the grasshopper was looking sad, not the fence rail. "What is the matter?" asked Uncle Wiggily kindly. "Are you sad and lonesome because you can't have some cherry pie, or some bread and butter, or because you can't see any funny tricks? If you are, don't worry, Mr. Grasshopper, for Percival and I can give you something to eat, and also do some tricks to make you laugh." "No, I am not sad about any of those things," replied the grasshopper. "But you see I gave a big jump over a large stone a little while ago, and I sprained my left hind leg. Now I can't jump any more, and here it is summer, and, of course, we grasshoppers have to hop, or we don't make any money." "Oh, don't let a little thing like that worry you," spoke Uncle Wiggily. "I have some very nice salve that a gentleman and his boy gave me when their automobile ran over me, and it cured my sore toe. So I think it will cure your left hind leg." Then he put some salve on the grasshopper's leg, and in a little while it was much better. "Now we must travel on again, to seek our fortune," said Uncle Wiggily. "Come, Percival." "I will just do one little trick to make the grasshopper feel better before we leave," said the circus dog. So he stood up on the end of his tail, and went around and around, and winked first one eye, and then the other. It was too funny for anything, really it was. Well, the alligator laughed at that. Oh, there I go again. I mean the grasshopper laughed. And then Uncle Wiggily and Percival went off together, very glad indeed that they had had a chance to do a kindness, even to a grasshopper. Pretty soon they came to a place where there were two roads branching off, one to the right hand and the other to the left, like the letter Y. "I'll tell you what we'll do," said Percival. "You go to the right, Uncle Wiggily, and I'll go to the left, and later on we'll meet by the mill pond, and perhaps each of us may have found his fortune by that time." "Good!" cried Uncle Wiggily. "We'll do it." So he went off one way, and the circus dog took the other path through the woods. And now I must tell you what happened to the old gentleman rabbit. Uncle Wiggily went along for some time, and just as he got to a place where there was a large stone, all of a sudden out popped a big fat toad, and it wasn't a nice toad either, but a bad toad. "Hello, Uncle Wiggily," said the squatty watty toad. "I haven't seen you in some time. I guess you must be getting pretty old. You can't jump as good as you once could, can you?" "Of course I can!" exclaimed the rabbit, a bit pettish like, for he didn't care to have even a toad think he couldn't jump as well as he ever could. "I'd like to see you," went on the toad. "See if you jump from here over on that pile of leaves," and he pointed to them with his warty toes. "I'll do it!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily. So he laid aside his crutch and his valise, gave a little run and a big jump, and then he came down ker-thump on the pile of leaves. But wait. Oh, I have something sad to tell you. The toad was only playing a trick on the rabbit, and those leaves were right over a big, deep, dark well, and as soon as Uncle Wiggily landed on the leaves he fell through, for there were no boards under them to cover up the well, and down, down, down he went, and if there had been water in the well he would have been drowned. But the well was dry, I'm glad to say. Still Uncle Wiggily had a great fall, almost like the tumble of Humpty Dumpty. "Aha!" exclaimed the mean, squatty, squirmy toad. "Now you are in the well, and I'm going off and tell the wolves, so they can come and get you out and eat you. Aha!" Oh, but wasn't that toad a most unpleasant one? You see, he used to work for the wolves, doing all sorts of mean things for them, and trapping all the animals he could for them. So off the toad hopped to call the wolves to come and get Uncle Wiggily, and the poor rabbit was left alone at the bottom of the well. He tried his best to get up, but he couldn't. "I guess I'll have to stay here until the wolves come," he thought sadly. "But I'll call for help and see what happens." So he called, "Help! Help! Help!" as loudly as he could. And all of a sudden a voice answered and asked, "Where are you?" "In the well!" shouted Uncle Wiggily, and he was afraid it was the wolves coming to eat him. But it wasn't. It was the limpy grasshopper, and he tried to pull Uncle Wiggily out of the well, but, of course, he wasn't strong enough. "But I'll get Percival, the circus dog, and he'll pull you out before the wolves come," said the grasshopper. "Now I have a chance to do you a kindness for the one you did me." So he hopped off, as his leg was nearly all better, and he found Percival on the left road and told him what had happened. And my, how that circus dog did rush back to help Uncle Wiggily, and he got him out of the well in no time, by lowering a long rope to him, and pulling the rabbit gentleman up. And then the rabbit and dog ran away, before the toad could come back with the savage wolves, who didn't get any supper out of the well, after all, and it served them right. So that's all of this story, but I have some more, about the adventures of Uncle Wiggily, and next, in case the load of hay doesn't fall on my puppy dog and break off his curly tail, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily and Jennie Chipmunk. End of story 17. Story 18 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 18. Uncle Wiggily and Jennie Chipmunk. After Uncle Wiggily had been pulled out of the well by Percival, the old circus dog, and they had run far enough off so that the wolves couldn't get them, the rabbit and the grasshopper and Percival sat down on the ground to rest. For you see, Uncle Wiggily was tired from having fallen down the well, and the grasshopper was tired from having run so fast to call back Percival, and, of course, Percival was tired from having pulled up the old gentleman rabbit. So they were all pretty well tired out. "I'm sure I can't thank you enough for what you did for me," said Uncle Wiggily to Percival and the grasshopper. "And as a little treat I'm going to give you some cherry pie that I made for the hedgehog." So they ate some cherry pie, and then they felt better, and they were just going to travel on together again, when, all at once, there was a rustling in the bushes, and out flew Dickie Chip-Chip, the sparrow boy. "Oh, my!" cried Uncle Wiggily, wrinkling up his nose. "At first I thought you were a savage owl." "Oh, no, I'm not an owl," said Dickie, "but I'm in a great hurry, and perhaps I made a noise like an owl. Percival, you must come back home to the Bow Wow house right away." "Why?" asked Percival, sticking up his two ears so that he could hear better. "Because Peetie Bow Wow is very ill with the German measles, and he wants to see you do some of your funny circus tricks," spoke Dickie. "He thinks that will make him better." "Ha! I've no doubt that it will!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily. "If I were not traveling about, seeking my fortune, I'd go back with you, Percival. I love Peetie Bow Wow, and Jackie, too." "Oh, I'll go," said the grasshopper. "I will play Peetie a funny fiddle tune on my left hind leg, and that may make him laugh. And Nellie and I will sail through the air and go off to find some pretty flowers for him," said Dickie. So the sparrow boy, the grasshopper, and old Percival, the circus dog, started off together to see poor sick Peetie Bow Wow, leaving Uncle Wiggily there on the grass. "Give my love to Peetie," called the old gentleman rabbit after them, "and tell him that I'll come and see him as soon as I find my fortune." Uncle Wiggily felt a little bit sad and lonely when his friends were gone, but he ate another piece of cherry pie, taking care to get none of the juice on his blue necktie, and then he was a little happier. "Now to start off once more," he said. "I wonder what will happen next. But I know one thing, I'm never going to do any jumping for any squatty old toads any more." So Uncle Wiggily traveled on, and when it came night he didn't have any place to sleep. But as it happened, he met a kind old water snake, who had a nice house in an old pile of wood, and there the rabbit stayed until morning, when the water snake got him a nice breakfast of pond lilies, with crinkly eelgrass sauce on. Pretty soon it was nearly noon that day, and Uncle Wiggily was about to sit down on a nice green mossy bank in the woods, not a toy bank with money in it, you understand, but a dirt bank with moss on it like a carpet. That's where he was going to sit. "I think I'll eat my dinner," said the old gentleman rabbit as he opened his valise, and just then he heard a voice in the woods singing, and this was the song: "Oh, dear, I'm lost, I know I am. I don't know what to do. I had a big red ribbon, and I had one colored blue. But now I haven't got a one, because a savage bear took both of them and tied a string around my curly hair. I wish I had a penny bright to buy a trolley car. I'd ride home then, because you see, to walk it is too far." "I guess that some one is in trouble, all right," said Uncle Wiggily, as he cautiously peeped through the bushes. "Though perhaps it is a little wolf boy or a fox." But when he looked, whom should he see but little Jennie Chipmunk, and she was crying as hard as she could cry, so she couldn't sing any more. "Why, Jennie, what is the matter?" kindly asked Uncle Wiggily. "Oh, I came out in the woods to gather acorns in a little basket for supper," she said, "and I guess I must have come too far. The first thing I knew a big bear jumped out of the bushes at me, and he took off both my nice new hair ribbons and put on this old string." And sure enough, there was only just an old black shoestring on Jennie's nice hair. "Where is that bear?" asked Uncle Wiggily, quite savage like. "Just tell me where he is, and I'll make him give you back those ribbons, and then I'll show you the way home." "Oh, the bear ran off after he scared me," said the little chipmunk girl. "Please don't look for him, Uncle Wiggily, or he might eat you all up." "Pooh!" exclaimed the old gentleman rabbit. "I'm not afraid of a bear. I have traveled around a great deal of late, and I have had many adventures. It takes more than a bear to scare me." "Oh, it does it?" suddenly cried a growly, scrowly voice. And would you believe me, right out from the bushes jumped that savage bear, and he had Jennie's blue ribbon tied on his left ear, and the red one tied on his right ear, and he looked too queer for anything. "I can't scare you, eh?" he cried to the rabbit. "Well, I'm just going to eat you and that Chipmunk girl all up, and maybe that will scare you." So he made a jump for Uncle Wiggily, but do you suppose the rabbit gentleman was afraid? Not a bit of it. He knew what he was going to do. "Quick, Jennie!" called Uncle Wiggily. "Get in front of me. I'll fix this bear all right." So Jennie got in front, and the rabbit turned his back on the bear, and then Uncle Wiggily began scratching in the dirt with his sharp claws. My, how he did make the dirt fly! He was just like a regular rain shower of sand and gravel. And the dirt flew all over that bear, in his eyes and nose and mouth and ears it went, and he sneezed, and he couldn't see out of his eyes, and he fairly howled. And by that time Uncle Wiggily had dug a big hole in the ground with his feet, and he and Jennie hid there until the bear ran off to get some water to wash the dirt off his face, and then the rabbit and the chipmunk girl came out safely. Then Uncle Wiggily gave Jennie some pennies to buy 2 new hair ribbons, and he showed her the way home with her basket of acorns, and he himself went on with his travels. And he had another adventure the next day. Now, in case a cowboy doesn't come along and take my little pussy cat off to the Wild West show, I'll tell you next about Uncle Wiggily and the paper lantern. End of story 18. Story 19 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 19. Uncle Wiggily and the Lantern. After Uncle Wiggily had taken Jennie Chipmunk home, so that the bear couldn't get her, as I told you about in the story before this one, the old gentleman rabbit walked on over the fields and through the woods, seeking his fortune. He looked everywhere for it, down in hollow stumps, behind big stones, and even in an old well, but you may be sure he didn't jump down any more wells. No, I guess not. "Ha! Here is a little brook!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily after a while, as he came to a small stream of water flowing over green, mossy stones, with a nice gurgling sound, like an ice cream soda. "Perhaps I might find my fortune here." But he looked and he looked in the water without seeing anything but a goldfish. "I might sell the goldfish for money," thought the fortune-hunting rabbit, "but it wouldn't be kind to take him out of the brook, so I won't. I'll look a little farther on the other side." Then, taking up his crutch and his valise, Uncle Wiggily gave a big jump and leaped safely across the water. Then once more he traveled on. Pretty soon he came to a place where there was a tree, and on one branch of this tree there hung a funny round ball that looked as if it was made of gray colored paper, and there was a funny buzzing sound coming from it. "Ha! Do you see that?" asked a big fat hoptoad, as he suddenly bobbed up out of the grass. It was the same toad who had made the rabbit jump down in the leaf-covered well. "Do you see that?" asked the toad. "Well, if you want to find your fortune, take a stick and hit that ball." "Indeed I will not!" cried the old gentleman rabbit. "I know you and your tricks. That is a hornet's nest, and if I struck it they would fly out and sting me. Oh, no! You can't catch me again. Now you go away, or I'll tell a policeman dog to arrest you." So the toad knew it was of no use to try to fool Uncle Wiggily again, and he hopped away, scratching his warty back on a sharp stone. Well, the old gentleman rabbit traveled on, and when it came night he wondered where he was going to stay, for he hadn't yet found his fortune, and the weather looked as if it was going to rain. Then, all of a sudden, he heard voices calling like this: "Come on, Nanny, you've got to blind your eyes now, and I'll go hide." "All right, Billie," was the answer. "And after that we'll get Uncle Butter to tell us a story." "I guess I know who those children are," thought Uncle Wiggily, though he had not yet seen them. "That's Billie and Nanny Goat talking," and surely enough it was, and most unexpectedly the rabbit had come right up to the house where they lived, on the edge of the woods. Well, you can just imagine how glad Billie and Nanny were to see Uncle Wiggily. They danced all around him and held him by the paws and kissed him between his long ears, and Billie carried his satchel for him. "Oh, we're so glad you are here!" they cried. "Mamma, Papa, Uncle Butter, here is Uncle Wiggily!" Well, the whole goat family was glad to see the rabbit traveler, and after supper he told them of his adventures, and how he was out seeking his fortune. And Billie and Nannie told what they had been doing, and Nannie showed how she could cut things out of paper, like the children do in the kindergarten class in school. She could make little houses, with smoke coming out of the chimney, and paper lanterns, and boxes, and oh, ever so many things. The lanterns she made were especially fine, just like Chinese ones. Then it came time to go to bed, and in the night a very strange thing happened, and I am going to tell you all about it. Along about 12 o'clock, when all was still and quiet, and when the little mice were beginning to think it was time for them to creep out of their holes, and hunt for bread and cheese, about this time there sounded a queer noise down at the front door of the goat house. "Huh, what is that?" asked Mrs. Goat. "I guess it was the cats," said Mr. Goat, getting ready to go to sleep again. "No, I'm sure it was a burglar fox," said the lady goat. "Please get up and look." Well, of course, Mr. Goat had to do so, after his wife asked him like that. So he poked his head out of the upstairs window, over the front door, and he called out: "Who is down there?" "I'm a burglar fox," was the answer. "I'm coming to rob you." "Oh, my!" cried Mrs. Goat, when she heard that. "Get a gun and shoot him, Mr. Goat." And at that Billie and Nannie began to cry, for they were afraid of burglars, and Uncle Butter got up and began looking for a whistle with which to call a policeman dog, but he couldn't find it. Then the burglar fox started in breaking down the door, so that he could get in, and still Mr. Goat couldn't find his gun. "Oh, we'll all be killed!" cried Mrs. Goat. "Oh, if some one would only help us!" "Ha! I will help you!" cried Uncle Wiggily, jumping out of bed. "I'll scare that fox so that he'll run away." "But I can't find my gun," said Mr. Goat. "No matter," answered the brave rabbit. "I can scare him with a paper lantern such as Nannie can make. Quick, Nannie, make me a big paper lantern." Well, the little goat girl stopped crying then, and she got her paper and her scissors and the paste pot, and she began to make a paper lantern as big as a water pail. Uncle Wiggily and Billie helped her, and all the while the burglar fox was banging on the door and crying out: "Let me in! Let me in!" "Quick, is the lantern ready?" asked Uncle Wiggily, jumping around in a circle like Ring Around the Rosie. "Here it is," said Nannie. So the rabbit gentleman took it, all nicely made as it was, and inside of it he put a hot blazing candle, and the lantern was so big that the candle didn't burn the sides of the paper. Then Uncle Wiggily tied the lantern to a string, and he lowered it right down out of the window, down in front of the burglar fox, and the hot candle in the lantern burned the fox's nose, and he thought it was a policeman climbing down out of a tree to catch him, and before you could count 40-11, the bad burglar fox ran away, and so he didn't rob the goats after all. And oh, how thankful Nannie and Billie and their papa and mamma were to Uncle Wiggily. Now, in case the little boy next door doesn't take our clothesline to make a swing for his puppy dog, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily and the paper house in the following story. End of story 19. Story 20 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 20. Uncle Wiggily and the Paper House. Bright and early next morning Uncle Wiggily got up, and he took a careful look around to see if there were any signs of the burglar fox, about whom I told you in another story. "I guess he's far enough off by this time," said Billie Goat, as he polished his horns with a green leaf. "Yes, indeed," spoke Uncle Wiggily. "It is a good thing that Nannie knew how to make a paper lantern." "Oh, I can make lots of things out of paper," said the little goat girl. "Our teacher in school shows us how. Why, I can even make a paper house." "Can you, indeed?" asked the old gentleman rabbit, as he washed his paws and face for breakfast. "Now I should dearly like to know how to make a paper house." "Why?" asked Billie Goat, curious like. so that when I am traveling about, looking for my fortune, and night comes on, and I have no place to stay, then I could make me a paper house, and be all nice and dry in case it rained," replied the rabbit. "Oh, but the water would soon soak through the paper," said Billie. "I know, for once I made a paper boat, and sailed it on the pond, and soon it was soaked through and sank away down." "Oh, but if I used that funny greasy paper that comes inside cracker boxes, the kind with wax on it, that wouldn't wet through," spoke the rabbit as he went inside the goat house with the children, for Mrs. Goat had called them in to breakfast. "That would be just fine!" exclaimed Nanny as she passed some apple sauce and oatmeal to Uncle Wiggily. "After breakfast I'll show you how to make a paper house." Well, surely enough, as soon as breakfast was over, and before she and Billie had gone to school, Nanny showed the old gentleman rabbit how to make a paper house. You take some paper and some scissors, and you cut out the sides of the house, and the roof, and you make windows and doors in these sides. And then you make a chimney, and you fasten them all together with paste or glue. And there you are. Isn't it easy? And if you only make the paper house large enough, you can get inside of it and have a play party, and perhaps you can make paper dishes, and knives and forks. But listen, if you make paper things to eat, like cake or cookies or anything like that, please only make believe to eat them, for they are bad for the digestion, if you really chew them. "Well, I think I'll travel along now, and once more seek my fortune," said Uncle Wiggily, when Billie and Nanny were ready to go to school. So Mrs. Goat packed up for the rabbit a nice lunch in his valise, and Nanny gave him some waxed paper, that the rain wouldn't melt, and Billie gave his uncle a pair of scissors, and off Mr. Longears started. Well, he traveled on, over the fields and through the woods, and across little brooks, and pretty soon it was coming on dark night, and the rabbit gentleman hadn't found his fortune. "Now I wonder where I can stay to night," thought Uncle Wiggily, as he looked about him. He could see nothing but an old stump, which was not hollow, so he couldn't get inside of it, and the only other thing that happened to be there was a flat stone, and he couldn't get under that. "I guess I must make me a paper house," said the old gentleman rabbit. "Then I can sleep in it in peace and quietness, and I'll travel on again in the morning." So he got out the waxed paper, and he took the scissors, and sitting down on the green grass he cut out the sides and roof of the paper house. Then he made the chimney and put it on the roof, and then he fastened the house together, and crawled inside, with his valise and his barber pole crutch. "I guess I won't make too many windows or doors," thought Uncle Wiggily, "for a savage bear or a burglar fox might come along in the night and try to get in." So he only made one door and one window in the house. But he made a little fireplace out of stones, and built a little fire in it to cook his supper. But listen, you children must never, never make a fire unless some big person is near to put it out in case it happens to run away, and chases after you to catch you. Fires are dreadfully scary things for little folks, so please be careful. Well, Uncle Wiggily cooked his supper, frying some carrots in a little tin frying pan he had with him, and then he said his prayers and went to bed. Soon he was fast asleep. Well, in the middle of the night Uncle Wiggily was awakened in his paper house by hearing a funny noise outside. "Ha! I wonder what that can be!" he exclaimed, sitting up and reaching out for his crutch. The noise kept on, pitter patter, pitter patter patter, pitter pat pit pat pit. "Oh, that sounds like the toenails of the burglar fox running around the house," said the rabbit. Then he listened more carefully, and suddenly he laughed. "Ha! Ha!" Then he got up and looked out of the window. "Why, it's only the raindrops pit-pattering on the roof," he said. "Isn't it jolly to be in a house when it rains, and you can't get wet? After this every night I'm going to always build a waxed paper house," said Uncle Wiggily. So he listened to the raindrops, and he thought how nice it was not to be wet, and he went to sleep again. And pretty soon he woke up once more, for he heard another noise. This time it was a sniffing, snooping, woofing sort of noise, and Uncle Wiggily knew that it wasn't the rain. "I'm sure that's the burglar fox," he said. "What shall I do? He can smash my paper house with his teeth and claws and then eat me. I should have built a wooden house. But it's too late now. I know what I'll do. I'll dig a cellar underneath my paper house, and I'll hide there, in case that fox smashes the roof." So Uncle Wiggily got up very softly, and right in the middle of the dirt floor of his paper house he began to burrow down to dig a cellar. My, how his paws made the sand and gravel fly, and soon he had dug quite a large cellar in which to hide. And all this time the sniffing, snooping sound kept on, until all of a sudden a voice cried, "Let me in!" "Who are you?" asked Uncle Wiggily. "I'm the bad alligator," was the answer, "and if you don't let me in I'll smash down your paper house with one swoop of my scalery-ailery tail." "You can't come in!" cried the rabbit, and then that bad alligator gave one swoop of his tail and smashed Uncle Wiggily's nice paper house all to pieces. But do you s'pose the rabbit was there? No, indeed. He just grabbed up his crutch and valise and ran down into his cellar as far and as fast as he could run, just as the roof fell in. And the cellar wasn't big enough for the alligator to get in, and so he had to stay outside, and he couldn't get Uncle Wiggily. And then it rained and thundered and lightninged, and the alligator got scared and ran off, but the rabbit gentleman was safe down in his cellar, and he didn't get a bit wet, and went to sleep there for the rest of the night. Now please go to bed, and in case my toothbrush doesn't go out roller skating and fall down and get bald-headed, I'll tell you next about Uncle Wiggily and the paper boat. End of story 20. Story 21 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 21. Uncle Wiggily in a Paper Boat. When the morning dawned after he had slept all night in the cellar under his paper house, that the alligator, with his swooping scalery-ailery tail, had knocked down, Uncle Wiggily awakened, brushed the dirt from his ears, and crawled out. "My!" he exclaimed as he saw the paper house all flat on the ground, like a pancake. "Nanny Goat would certainly be sorry to see this, but I suppose it can't be helped. Anyhow, it's a good thing that I am not squashed as flat as that house is. Now I'll see about my breakfast, and then I'll travel on again." So the gentleman rabbit got his breakfast, eating almost the last piece of the cherry pie, which he had left from the time when he made some for the hedgehog, and then, taking his crutch, striped red, white and blue, like a barber pole, off he started. Well, pretty soon, in a little while, not so very long, Uncle Wiggily came to a pond of water, and, looking down into it, he saw the most beautiful goldfish that you can imagine. It was a big fish, too, and the scales on it were as round as gold dollars. "My!" exclaimed the rabbit. "If I had that fish, and I could take him to a jewelry shop and sell him, I would get so much money that my fortune would be made, and I wouldn't have to travel any farther. But I guess the fish would rather stay in the pond than in a jewelry shop." "Indeed I would," answered the fish, looking up, "and I am glad you are so kind as to be thoughtful of my feelings. Perhaps I may be able to help you some day." And with that the fish dived away down under the water, after calling good by to the rabbit, and then Uncle Wiggily hopped on, and he didn't think any more about the goldfish until some time after that. Well, as soon as the elephant had his trunk packed Oh, hold on, if you please. I wonder what's the matter with me. There's no elephant in this story. He comes in it about 5 pages farther on. Well, after traveling for several hours, Uncle Wiggily ate his dinner. Then he hopped on some more, and he looked all around for his fortune, but he couldn't find it. Then it began to get dark, and he wondered where he could stay that night. "I might build a paper house," he said, "but if I do the alligator might come along and smash it, and this time he would probably catch me. I wonder what I'd better do." So he looked ahead, and there he saw a stream of water. It was quite a wide brook, but on the other side of it he saw a nice little wooden house that no one lived in. "Now if I could only get over there I'd be safe," said the old gentleman rabbit. "I guess I'll wade across." Well, he started to do so, but he soon found that the water was too deep for him to wade. It was over his head. "I'll have to swim across," said Uncle Wiggily. But as soon as he got ready to do that, he found himself in more trouble. for he couldn't carry his crutch and valise across with him if he swam. And he didn't like to leave them on the shore, for fear the alligator would get them. "Oh, I certainly am in great trouble," said the rabbit. "It's getting darker and darker, and I have no place to stay. I haven't even any paper with which to make me a paper house, but if I could only get across to the wooden house I'd be safe." And, just as he spoke, there came a little puff of wind, and lo and behold! A nice piece of paper was blown right down out of a tree, where it had been caught on a branch. Right at Uncle Wiggily's side it fell, that paper did. "Oh, joy!" the rabbit gentleman cried. "Here is paper to make me a house with." But when he looked more closely at it, he saw that it wasn't big enough for a house. And it wasn't the kind of paper that would keep out the rain, either. "That will never do," said Uncle Wiggily sadly. "Ah, but I have an idea. I will make me a paper boat, as Billy Goat once did, and in the boat I'll sail across the stream, and sleep in the little wooden house." So he folded up the paper, first like a soldier's hat, and then like a fireman's hat, and then he pulled on the two ends, and presto change! He had a paper boat. Then he took his crutch, and stuck it up in the middle of the boat, and put a piece of paper on the crutch, and he had a sail. Then he put the boat in the water, and got in it himself. I mean he got in the boat, not the water, with his valise. "Here we go!" cried the old gentleman rabbit, and he shoved the boat out from the shore. The wind caught in the little paper sail, and away Uncle Wiggily went, as fine could be. "I'll soon be on the other shore," he said, and just then he looked down and he saw some water coming inside the boat. That's bad!" he cried. "I'm afraid my boat is leaking." The wind blew harder and the boat went faster, but more water came in, for you see the paper was sort of melting, and falling apart, like an ice cream cone, for it wasn't the waxed kind of paper, from the inside of cracker boxes, the kind that water won't hurt. Well, the boat began to sink, and the water came up to Uncle Wiggily's knees, and then, all of a sudden, there was a funny sound on shore, a snipping, snooping, woofing, woofing sound, and into the water jumped the alligator with the scalery, swooping tail. "Now I've got you!" he cried, snapping his jaws at the poor old gentleman rabbit, and really it did seem as if Uncle Wiggily would be eaten up. But you never can tell what is going to happen in this world. Never, indeed. All of a sudden, just as the paper boat was melting all to pieces, and Uncle Wiggily was trying, as best he could, to swim to shore with his crutch and valise, and just as the alligator was going to grab him, along came the big, kind goldfish. "Jump on my back, Uncle Wiggily!" cried the fish, and the rabbit did so, in the twinkling of an eye. And before the alligator could grab Uncle Wiggily, the goldfish swam to shore with him, and he was safe. And the alligator got some soap in his eye, from washing his face too hard, and went sloshing away as mad as could be, but it served him right. And Uncle Wiggily slept safely in the wooden house all night, and dreamed about finding a gold dollar. Now, in case the banana man brings me some pink oranges for the elephant's little boy, I'll tell you in another story about Uncle Wiggily and the mud pie. End of story 21. Story 22 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 22. Uncle Wiggily and the Mud Pie. Uncle Wiggily slept very soundly that night in the little wooden house, across on the other side of the brook, where the alligator tried to catch him, but didn't. And when he awakened in the morning, the rabbit traveler wondered what he was going to have for breakfast. But he didn't wonder very long, for, as soon as he had gotten up, and had washed his paws and face, and combed out his ears, oh dear me, I mean his whiskers, as soon as he had done that, he heard a knock on the door. "Oh my, says Dud, and a bottle of milk!" exclaimed the old gentleman rabbit. "I hope that isn't the scary, flary alligator again." So he peeped out of the window, but to his surprise, he didn't see anyone. "I'm sure I heard a knock," he said, "but I guess I was mistaken." Well, he was going over to his valise to see if it had in it anything to eat, when the knock again sounded on the door. "No, I wasn't mistaken," said Uncle Wiggily. "I wonder who that can be. I'll peep in to find out." So he hid behind the window curtain, and kept a close watch, and the first things he saw were some little stones flying through the air, and they hit against the front door with a rattle-tee-bang, and it was these stones that had made the sound that was like a knock. "Oh, it must be some bad boys after me," thought the poor old gentleman rabbit. "My, I do seem to be having a dreadful time seeking my fortune. There is always some kind of trouble." And then more stones came through the air, and banged on the door, and this time Uncle Wiggily saw that they came from the stream, and what is more, he saw the goldfish throwing the stones and pebbles out of the brook with his tail. Then the rabbit knew it was all right, for the goldfish was a friend of his, so he ran out. "Were you throwing stones at the house?" asked Uncle Wiggily.
"Yes," replied the fish.
"It was the only way in which I could knock on your door. You see, I dare not leave the water, and I wanted you to know that I had some breakfast for you."
And with that the kind goldfish took a little basket made of watercress from off his left front fin, and handed Uncle Wiggily the basket, not his fin, for he needed that to swim with.
"You'll find some cabbage salad, with snorkery snickery eel-grass dressing on it, some water lily cake, and some moss-covered eggs for your breakfast," said the fish, "and I wish you good luck on your travels to day."
"Thank you very much," said Uncle Wiggily, "and I am very much obliged to you for saving me from the alligator last night."
"Pray do not mention it," spoke the fish most condescendingly. "I always like to help my friends."
And with that he swam away, and Uncle Wiggily ate his breakfast, and then, taking his crutch and valise, he set off on his travels again. He hopped on for some time, and finally he came to a place where there were some high, prickly bramble briar bushes. "I will rest here in their shade a bit," thought the old gentleman rabbit, "and then I will go on." So he sat down, and as the sun was quite warm, he fell asleep before he knew it. But he was suddenly awakened by a hissing sound, just like when steam comes out of the parlor radiator on a frosty night. Then a voice cried:
"Now I've got you!"
Uncle Wiggily looked up, and there was a big snake, just going to grab him. But do you s'pose the rabbit waited for that snake? Not a bit of it. Catching up his crutch and valise, he gave one tremendous and extraordinary springery spring, and over the prickery stickery briar and bramble bushes he went, flying through the air, and the snake couldn't get him. But when Uncle Wiggily came down on the other side of the bushes, oh my, that was a different story, for where do you imagine he landed? Where indeed, but right in the middle of a big mud pie that two little hedgehog boys were making there. Yes, sir, right into the middle of that squashery mud pie fell Uncle Wiggily. Oh, how the mud splashed up! It went all over the rabbit, and some got on the two little hedgehog boys. Well, they were as surprised as anything when they saw a nice old gentleman rabbit come down in the middle of their pie, and at first they thought he had done it on purpose. "Let's stick him full of our stickery stockery quills," said one hedgehog boy. "Yes, and then let's pull his ears," said the other hedgehog boy. But, mind you, they didn't really mean anything bad, only perhaps they thought Uncle Wiggily was a savage fox, or a little white bear. "Oh, boys, I'm sorry," said the old gentleman rabbit as soon as he could dig the mud out of his mouth. "What made you do it?" asked the biggest hedgehog boy, wiping some mud out of his eye. "Yes, our pie is all spoiled," said his brother, "and we were just going to bake it." "Oh, it is too bad," said Uncle Wiggily sorrowfully. "But you see I had to get away from that snake, and I didn't have time to look where I was jumping. I'm glad, though, that I left the snake on the other side of the bushes." "So are we," said the two hedgehog boys.
"But you didn't leave me there. I'm here!"
suddenly cried a voice, and out wiggled the snake again. He started to catch the rabbit, but those two brave hedgehog boys grabbed up a lot of mud and plastered it in that snake's eye so that he couldn't see, and he had to wiggle down to the pond to wash it out. Then Uncle Wiggily and the boys were safe, and he helped them to make another mud pie, with stones in for raisins, and he gave them some of his real cherry pie, and oh, how they liked it. Then they were all happy, and Uncle Wiggily stayed at the hedgehog's house until the next morning. Now, in case the little girl in the next house brings me a watermelon ice cream cone with a rose on top, I'll tell you on the next page about Uncle Wiggily and the elephant. End of story 22. Story 23 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garis. Story 23. Uncle Wiggily and the Elephant. Uncle Wiggily didn't sleep very well at the hedgehog's house that night, and the reason for it was this. You see, they didn't have many beds there, and first the rabbit gentleman lay down with the smallest little porcupine boy in his bed. But pretty soon, along about in the middle of the night, this little boy got to dreaming that he was a rubber ball, and he rolled over in the bed, and he rolled up against Uncle Wiggily, and the stickery stickers from the little hedgehog chap stuck in the old gentleman rabbit. "Oh, dear!" cried Uncle Wiggily. "I think I'll have to go and sleep with your brother Jimmie." So he went over to the other hedgehog boy's bed, but land sakes, Flopsy, Dub, and a basket of soap bubbles! As soon as the rabbit got in there, that other hedgehog chap began to dream that he was a jumping jack, and so he jumped up and down, and he jumped on top of Uncle Wiggily and stuck more stickery stickers in him, until at last the rabbit got up and said, "Oh, dear, I guess I'll have to go to sleep on the floor." So he did that, putting his head on his satchel for a pillow, and pulling his red, white, and blue striped barber pole crutch over him for a cover. And in the morning he felt a little better. "Well, I think I will travel on once more," said Uncle Wiggily, after a breakfast of strawberries and mush and milk. "I may find my fortune today." The hedgehog boys wanted him to stay with them, and make more mud pies, or even a cherry one, but the rabbit gentleman said he had no time. So off he went over hills and down dales and along through the woods. Pretty soon, not so very long, just as Uncle Wiggily was walking behind a big rock, as large as a house, he heard someone crying. Oh, such a loud crying voice as it was, and the old gentleman rabbit was a bit frightened. "For it sounds like a giant crying," he said to himself, "and if it's a giant he may be a bad one, who would hurt me. I guess I'll run back the other way." Well, he started to run, but, just as he did so, he heard the crying voice again, and this time it said,
Oh, dear me! Oh, if someone would only help me! Oh, I am in such trouble!
"Come, I don't believe that is a giant after all," thought the rabbit. "It may be Sammie Littletail, who has grown to be such a big boy that I won't know him any more." So he took a careful look, but instead of seeing his little rabbit nephew, he saw a big elephant sitting on the ground, crying as hard as he could cry. Now, you know, when an elephant cries, it isn't like when you cry once in a great while, or when baby cries every day. No, indeed, an elephant cries so very many tears that if you don't have a water pail near you to catch them, you may get your feet wet. That is, if you don't have on rubbers. Well, that's the way it was this time. The elephant was crying big salty tears about the size of rubber balls, and they were rolling down his eyes and along his trunk, which was like a fire engine hose, until there was quite a little stream of water flowing down the hill toward the rabbit. "Oh, please don't cry any more," called Uncle Wiggily. "Why not?" asked the elephant, sadly like, and he cried harder than before. "Because if you do," replied the rabbit, "I will have to get a pair of rubber boots in which to wade out to see you." "I'll try to stop," said the big animal, but instead he cried harder than before, boo-hooing and hoo-booing until you would have thought it was raining, and Uncle Wiggily wished he had an umbrella. "Why, whatever is the matter?" asked the rabbit.
Oh, I stepped on a tack, answered the elephant, and it is sticking in my foot. I can't walk, and I can't dance, and I can't get back to the circus. Oh dear me, sudstud and a red balloon. Oh, how miserable I am."
"Too bad," said Uncle Wiggily. "Was it a large tack that you stepped on?"
"Was it?" asked the elephant, sort of painful like. "Why, it feels as big as a dishpan in my foot. Here, you look, and perhaps you can pull it out."
He raised up one of his big feet, which were about as large as a wash tub full of clothes on Monday morning, and he held it out to Uncle Wiggily. "Why, I can't see anything here," said the rabbit, looking at the big foot through his spectacles.
"Oh, dear, it's there all right!" cried the elephant. "It feels like 2 wash tubs now," and he began to cry some more. "Here, hold on, if you please," shouted Uncle Wiggily. "I'll have to make a boat if you keep on shedding so many tears, for there will be a lake here. Wait, I'll look once more." So he looked again, and this time he saw just the little, tiniest baby tack you can imagine, about the size of a pinhead, sticking in the elephant's foot. "Wait, I have it! Was this it?" suddenly asked the rabbit, as he took hold of the tack in his paw and pulled it out. "That's it!" exclaimed the elephant, waving his trunk. "It's out! Oh, how much better I feel! Whoop-de-doodle-doo!" And then he felt so fine that he began to dance. Then all of a sudden he began to cry once more. "Why, what in the world is the matter now?" asked Uncle Wiggily, wishing he had a pail so that he might catch the elephant's salty tears. "Oh, I feel so happy that I can't help crying, because my pain is gone!" exclaimed the big creature. Then he cried about 11 bushels of tears, and a milk bottle full besides, and there was a little pond around him, and Uncle Wiggily was in it up to his neck. Then, all of a sudden, in came swimming the alligator right toward the rabbit. "Ah, now I'll get you!" cried the skillery scalery beast. "No, you won't!" shouted the elephant. "Uncle Wiggily is my friend." So he put his trunk down in the water, and sucked it all up, and then he squirted it over the trees. That left the alligator on dry land, and then the elephant grabbed the alligator up in his strong trunk, and tossed him into the briar bushes, scalery, ailery tail and all, and the alligator crawled away after a while. So that's how Uncle Wiggily was saved by the alligator by the crying elephant, and the rabbit and the elephant traveled on together for some days. Now, as I see the Sandman coming, I must stop. But, in case I don't fall into the washtub with my new suit on, and get it all colored sky blue pink, so I can't go to the picnic, I'll tell you next about Uncle Wiggily and the cherry tree. End of story 23. Story 24 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 24. Uncle Wiggily and the Cherry Tree. Uncle Wiggily Longears and the crying elephant were walking along together one day, talking about the weather and wondering if it would rain, and all things like that. Only the elephant wasn't crying any more, for the rabbit had pulled the tack that was hurting him out of the big beast's foot, you remember. "We'll travel on together to find our fortune, and look for adventures," said the elephant as he capered about and stood on his hind legs, because he felt so jolly. "Won't we have fun, Uncle Wiggily?"
"Well, we may," spoke the old gentleman rabbit, "but I don't see how we are going to carry along on our travels enough for us to eat. Of course, I don't need much, but you are such a big chap that you will have to have quite a lot, and my valise is small."
"Don't worry about that," replied the elephant. "Of course, you might think I could carry a lot of pie and cake and bread and butter in my trunk, but really I can't, you know, for about all that my trunk will hold is water. However, I think I can pick what hay and grass I want from along the road."
"Yes, and perhaps we may meet a man with a hot peanut wagon once in a while," suggested Uncle Wiggily, "and he may give you some peanuts."
"Oh, joy, I hope he does!" cried the big fellow. "I just love hot peanuts."
Well, they went on together for some time, when, all of a sudden, a man jumped out from behind the bushes and exclaimed:
"Ha, Mr. Elephant, I've been looking for you. Now you come right back with me to the circus where you belong."
And he went up to the elephant and took hold of his trunk.
"Oh, I don't want to go," whined the tremendous creature. "I want to stay with Uncle Wiggily and have some fun."
"But you can't," said the man. "You are needed in the circus. A lot of boys and girls are waiting in the tent to give you peanuts and popcorn."
"Well, then, I suppose I better go back," sighed the wobbly animal with the long tusks. "I'll see you again, Uncle Wiggily."
So the elephant said good bye to the rabbit and went back to the circus with the man, while the rabbit gentleman hopped on by himself. He hadn't gone very far before he heard a loud honk honk in the bushes. "Oh, there is another one of those terrible automobiles," thought the rabbit. But it wasn't at all. No, it was Grandfather Goosey Gander, and there he sat on a flat stone, honk honking through his yellow bill as hard as he could, and at the same time crying salty tears that ran down his nose, making it all wet. "Why, whatever is the matter?" asked Uncle Wiggily, as he went up to his friend, the duck drake gentleman. "Have you stepped on a tack too?" "No, it isn't that," was the answer. "I am so sick that I don't know what to do, and I'm far from my home, and my friends, the Wibblewobble family, and oh dear, it's just awful." "Let me look at your tongue," said the rabbit, and when Grandfather Goosey Gander stuck it out, Uncle Wiggily said: "Why, you have the epizootic. Very bad indeed, but perhaps I can cure you. Let me see. I think you need some bread and butter, and a cup of catnip tea. I'll make you some." So Uncle Wiggily made a little fire of sticks, and then he found an empty tin tomato can, and he boiled some water in it over the fire and made the catnip tea. Then he gave some to Grandfather Goosey Gander, together with some bread and butter. "Well, I feel a little better," said the old gentleman duck drake, when he had eaten, "but I am not well yet. It seems to me that if I could have some cherry pie I would feel better." "Perhaps you would," agreed Uncle Wiggily, "but though I know how to make nice cherry pie, and though I made some for the hedgehog, I don't see any cherry trees around here, so I can't make you one. There are no cherry trees." "Yes, there is one over there," said the duck drake, and he waved one foot toward it, while he quacked real faint and sorrowful like. "Sure enough, that is a cherry tree," said Uncle Wiggily, as he hopped over and looked at it, "and the cherries are ripe too. Now if I could only get some of them down I could make a cherry pie, and cure Grandfather Goosey Gander." But it wasn't easy to get the cherries off the tree, and Uncle Wiggily couldn't climb up after them, so he sat down and looked up at them, hoping some would fall off the stems, but none did. "Oh dear, I wonder how I'm going to get them," sighed the rabbit. "Perhaps I can knock off some with a stone." So he threw a stone, but no cherries came down. The stone did, though, and hit Uncle Wiggily on the nose, making him sneeze. "Stones are no good," exclaimed the rabbit. "I'll throw up my crutch." So he threw that into the tree, but it brought no cherries down, and the crutch, in falling, nearly hit Grandfather Goosey Gander and almost gave him the measles and mumps. "Well, I'll try and see what throwing up my valise will do," said the rabbit, and he tossed up the satchel, but bless you, that stayed up in the tree, and didn't come down at all. Neither did any cherries. "Oh, I'll have to give up," said Uncle Wiggily. "I'm afraid you can't have any cherry pie, Grandfather Goosey." "Oh, then I'll never get well," said the old duck drake gentleman sorrowfully.
"Yes, you will, too,"
suddenly cried out a voice, and out from the bushes ran the elephant.
"I'll pick the cherries off the tree with my long nosy trunk," he said, "and you can make all the pie you want to, Uncle Wiggily."
"Why, I thought you went back to the circus," said the rabbit.
"No, I ran away from the man," spoke the elephant.
Then he reached up with his long nose, and he picked a bushel of red, ripe, sweet, delicious cherries in less than a minute. Then he pulled down Uncle Wiggily's valise out of the tree, and then the old gentleman rabbit made 3 cherry pies, one for Grandfather Goosey Gander, and another, a tremendous big one, as large as a washtub, for the elephant, and a little one for himself. Then they ate their pies, and the old gentleman duck drake got well almost at once. So all 3 of them traveled on together to help the rabbit seek his fortune. Now, in case the ice cream man brings some nice, hot roast chestnuts for our canary bird, I'll tell you in another story about Uncle Wiggily and Grandfather Goosey Gander. End of story 24. Story 25 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 25. Uncle Wiggily and Grandpa Goosey. One day, not very long after the elephant had picked the cherries off the tree, so that Uncle Wiggily could make the cherry pies for Grandpa Goosey, the 3 friends were traveling along together through a deep, dark, dismal woods. "Where are we going?" asked the elephant, who had run away from the circus man to travel by himself. "Oh, to some place where we may find our fortune," said the old gentleman rabbit.
"I would much rather find some snails to eat," said Grandfather Goosey Gander, the old gentleman duck, as I shall call him for short, "for I am very hungry."
"What's that?" cried the rabbit. "Hungry after the nice pie I made for you?"
"Oh, that was some time ago. I could eat another pie right now," spoke the old duck.
But there wasn't any pie for him, so he had to eat a cornmeal sandwich with watercress salad on. And Uncle Wiggily ate some carrots and cabbage, and the elephant ate a lot of grass from a field, oh, a terrible lot, about 10 bushels, I guess. Then, all at once, as they were walking along over a bridge, a man suddenly jumped out from behind a tree and cried: "Aha! Now you won't get away from me, Mr. Elephant. This time I am sure going to take you back to the circus." And with that he threw a rope around the elephant's trunk and led him away. The elephant cried so many tears that there was a muddy puddle right near the bridge, and the big animal begged to be allowed to stay with Uncle Wiggily and Grandpa Goosey Gander, but the man said it could not be done. "Well, then, you and I will have to go on together," said the old gentleman rabbit to the duck after a bit. "Perhaps we may find our fortune."
"I think I could make money calling out honk honk on an automobile," said the grandfather. "Jimmy Wibblewobble once did that for a man. I think I'll look for a nice automobile gentleman to work for, and if I get money enough, we'll be rich."
Well, he looked and looked, but no one seemed to want an old duck for an auto horn, and the rabbit and Grandfather Goosey Gander kept on traveling together over the fields and through the woods. Pretty soon they came to a place where a June bug was sitting on the edge of a stone wall, buzzing his wings. "Let's ask him where we can find our fortunes," said Uncle Wiggily. So they asked the June bug. "Well," replied the buzzing creature, "I am not sure, but a little way from here are 2 roads. One or the other might bring you to your fortune. One goes to the right and the other to the left hand." "We will take the left hand road," said Uncle Wiggily. "We will go down that for some distance, and if we do not find a pot of gold or some ice cream cones at the end of it, we will come back and try the other road." So Uncle Wiggily and Grandfather Goosey Gander went down the left road. On and on they went, walking in the dust when there was any dust, and in the mud when there was any mud, but they didn't find any gold. "Oh, let's go back and try the other road," said the rabbit gentleman after a bit. "Perhaps that will be better." So back they went, stopping on the way to look at a big apple tree to see if there were any ripe apples on it. But there was none, so they didn't eat any. And I hope you children do the same this summer. Never eat green apples. Never, never, never. Wait until they are ripe. Well, by and by, after a while, not so very long, Uncle Wiggily, who was hopping along on his crutch, suddenly exclaimed: "Oh, I've lost my valise! What shall I do? I can't go on without it, for it has our lunch in it."
"I think you left it under the green apple tree," said the duck. "You had better go back for it, and I will wait here in the shade."
For Grandpa Goosey knew the rabbit could hop faster than he could waddle. Back Uncle Wiggily started, and surely enough he found his valise under the apple tree, where he had forgotten it. He picked it up, and was walking along with it back to where Grandfather Goosey Gander was waiting for him when, all of a sudden, out from behind a stump came Jennie Chipmunk with a basket of popcorn balls. "Oh, Uncle Wiggily!" she exclaimed. "Don't you want to buy some popcorn balls? Our church is having a little fair, and we are all trying to earn some money. I am selling popcorn to help the little heathen children buy red-colored handkerchiefs." "Of course I'll take some," said the old gentleman rabbit. "Popcorn balls, I mean, not children, or handkerchiefs," he said quickly. So he bought a pink one, and a white one, and a chocolate-colored one. Popcorn balls, you know, not children, and put them in his valise. Then Uncle Wiggily sent his love to Sammie and Susie Littletail by Jennie Chipmunk, and off he started to go back to where Grandfather Goosey Gander was waiting for him. Well, something terrible was happening to the poor old gentleman duck, and I'll tell you all about it. No sooner had the rabbit gotten near the shady tree under which the grandfather gentleman was resting, than he heard a cry.
"Help! Help! Help!" called the duck. "Oh, help me quickly, somebody!"
"What is the matter?" asked Uncle Wiggily, limping along as fast as he could.
"Oh, a bad snake has caught me!" cried the duck. "He has wound himself around my legs, and I can't walk, and he is going to eat me up. He jumped on me out of the bushes. He will eat me."
"He shall never do that!" cried the rabbit bravely. "I will save you." So he ran up to that snake, But the snake stuck out his tongue like a fork at the rabbit, and Uncle Wiggily was frightened. Then he tried to hit the snake with a stick, but the crawly creature hid down behind Grandfather Goosey, and so got out of the way. "I have it!" suddenly cried Uncle Wiggily. "The popcorn balls! Snakes love them. I'll make him eat them, and then he'll let Grandpa Goosey go." So from his valise the brave rabbit took the red and the white and the chocolate colored popcorn balls, and he rolled them along the ground, close to the snake's nose. And the snake smelled them, and he was so hungry for them that he uncoiled himself from Grandfather Goosey's legs, and let the old gentleman duck go. And the snake chased after the corn balls, and ate them all up. And then he didn't want anything more for a long while, and he went to sleep for 6 months and dreamed about turning into a hoop, and so he didn't bother anybody. So that's how Uncle Wiggily saved the duck. And next, in case the pretty baby across the street doesn't fall down and bump its nose, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily and the ice cream cones. End of story 25. Story 26 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 26. Uncle Wiggily's Ice Cream Cones. It didn't take Uncle Wiggily and Grandfather Goosey Gander long to get away from the place where the bad snake was, let me tell you, even if the crawly creature had eaten 3 popcorn balls and would sleep for 6 months. "This is no place for us," said the rabbit. "We must see if we can't find our fortune somewhere else." "I believe you," spoke Grandfather Goosey, rubbing his yellow legs, where the snake had wound tight around him like a clothesline. "We'll look for a place in which to stay tonight, and we'll see what we can find tomorrow." Well, they hurried on for some time, and pretty soon it began to get dark, and they couldn't find any place to stay. "I guess I'll have to dig a hole in the ground and make a burrow," said the rabbit. "Oh, but I couldn't stay underground," said the duck. "I'm used to sleeping in a wooden house." "That's so," said Uncle Wiggily. "Well, if I had some paper I could make you a paper house, but I haven't any, so I don't know what to do." And just then, away in the air, there sounded a voice saying, "Caw, caw, caw!" "Ha! That's a crow!" exclaimed Uncle Wiggily. "There must be green corn that is ready to pull up somewhere around here." "There is," said the crow, flying down. "I know a nice field of corn that a farmer has planted, and tomorrow I am going to pick some." "But aren't you afraid of the scarecrow?" asked the duck. "No, I'm not," said the crow. "The scarecrow is only some old clothes stuffed with straw, and is set out in the field to drive us crows away. We're not a bit afraid of it. Would you be?" "No, of course not," answered Grandfather Goosey Gander. "But then, you see, I'm not a crow. The scary figure wasn't meant for me." "Then you can stay in one of the pockets of the scarecrow's coat all night," said the crow. "It will be a good place for you to sleep." "The very thing!" cried Uncle Wiggily. So that night he dug himself a little house under the ground, and the duck gentleman flew up and got inside the pocket of the old coat which the scarecrow figure wore, and there the duck stayed all night, sleeping very soundly. "Well, now we'll travel on again," said Uncle Wiggily the next morning after breakfast. So he and Grandfather Goosey started off. Well, pretty soon it became hotter and hotter, for the sun was just beaming down as hard as it could, and Uncle Wiggily exclaimed, "I know what would taste good. An ice cream cone for each of us. Wait here, Grandfather, and I'll get 2 of them." "Fine," cried the grandfather duck, "but you seem to do all the hopping around, Uncle Wiggily. Why can't I go while you rest?" "Oh, I don't in the least mind going," replied the kind rabbit. "Besides, while I do not say it to be proud, and far be it from me to boast, I can go a little faster than you can in one hop, so I'll go." And so he did, leaving his valise in charge of Grandfather Goosey, who sat down with it under a shady tree. Pretty soon the old gentleman rabbit came to the little ice cream store that stood beside the road, right near a little pond of water, where the ice cream man could wash his dishes when he had to make them clean. "I'll have 2 nice big cold strawberry ice cream cones, "And please put plenty of ice cream in them," said Uncle Wiggily to the man.
"Right you are!" cried the ice cream man in a jolly voice, and say, I just wish you could have seen those cones. They were piled up heaping full of ice cream. Oh my, it just makes me hungry to write about them. Well, Uncle Wiggily, carefully carrying the cones, started to hop back to where he had left Grandfather Goosey. He hadn't gone far before he heard a growling voice cry,
"Hold on there a moment, Uncle Wiggily."
"Why?" asked the rabbit.
"Because I want to see what you've got," was the answer. "Ah, I see ice cream cones."
And with that a great big black bear jumped out of the bushes and stood right in front of Uncle Wiggily. "Let me pass!" cried the rabbit, holding the ice cream cones so that the bear couldn't get them.
"Indeed I will not!" cried the funny creature. "Ice cream cones indeed! If there is one thing that I'm fonder of than other, ice cream cones is it. Let me taste one."
Then, before the rabbit could do anything, that bad bear took one ice cream cone right away from him, and that bear did more than that. So he did. He stuck his long, red tongue down inside the cone, and he licked out every bit of cream with one long lick.
"My, but that's good!"
he cried, smacking his lips. "I guess I'll try the second one," he said, and he dropped the empty cone, not eating it, mind you, and he took the other full cone away from poor Uncle Wiggily before the rabbit gentleman could stand on his head, or even wave his short tail.
"Oh, don't eat that cone! It belongs to Grandfather Goosey!"
cried the rabbit, sadly like.
"Too late!"
cried the bear, in a growlerly voice.
"Here it goes!"
And with that he stuck his long red tongue down inside the second cone, and with one lick he licked all the ice cream out and threw the empty cone on the ground.
"Now I feel good and hungry, and I guess I'll eat you!" cried the bear.
He made a grab for the poor gentleman rabbit and folded him tight in his paws, but before that Uncle Wiggily had reached down and had picked up the two empty ice cream cones.
"Oh, let me go!"
cried Uncle Wiggily to the bear.
"Indeed I'll not!"
shouted the savage creature.
"I want you for supper."
Well, he was just going to eat Uncle Wiggily up, when that brave rabbit just took the sharp points of those two empty ice cream cones, and he stuck them in the bear's ticklish ribs, and Uncle Wiggily tickled the bear so that the furry, savage creature sneezed so loud and laughed so hard that Uncle Wiggily easily slipped out of his paws and hopped away before he could be caught again. So that's how the rabbit got safely away, and the empty ice cream cones were of some use after all. But Uncle Wiggily wondered how he could get a full one for Grandfather Goosey Gander, and how he did I'll tell you pretty soon, when, in case a butterfly doesn't bite a hole in my straw hat, the next story will be about Uncle Wiggily and the red ants. End of story 26. Story 27 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 27. Uncle Wiggily and the Red Ants. When Uncle Wiggily got to where Grandfather Goosey Gander was waiting for him under the shady tree, the old gentleman duck jumped up and cried out, "Oh, how glad I am to see you! I've just been wishing you would come back with those ice cream cones. My, I never knew the weather to be so warm at this time of year. Oh, won't they taste most delicious, those cones." You see, he didn't know yet what the bear had done, eaten all the ice cream out of the cones, as I told you in the other story. "Oh, dear!" cried the rabbit. "How sorry I am to have to disappoint you, Grandfather, but there is no ice cream." "No ice cream?" cried the alligator. "Oh, me, I mean the duck. No ice cream?" "Not a bit," said Uncle Wiggily, and then he told about what the savage bear creature had done, and also how he had used the cones to tickle him. "Well, that's too bad," said Grandfather Goosey. "But here, I'll give you money to buy more cones with." And he put his hand in his pocket, but lo and behold, he had lost all his money. "Never mind, perhaps I have some pennies," said the rabbit. So he looked, but oh, dear me, Suzdud, and the mustard pot, all of Uncle Wiggily's money was gone too. "Well, I guess we can't get any ice cream cones this week," said the old gentleman duck. "We'll have to drink water." "Oh, no, you won't," said a buzzing voice. "I'll get you each an ice cream cone. because you have always been so kind, both of you." And with that, out from the bushes flew a big, sweet honey bee, with a load of honey. "Have you got any ice cream cones, Mr. Bee?" asked the rabbit. "No, but I have sweet honey, and if I go down to the ice cream cone store and give the man some of my honey, he'll give me 3 cones, and there'll be one for you, and one for me, and—"
"One for Sister Sallie," interrupted Grandfather Goosey. "I wish she was here now."
"She could have a cone if she was here," said the honey bee, "as I could get 4. But as long as she is not, the extra cone will go to you, Grandpa. Now, come on, and I'll take my honey to the ice cream cone man." So they went with him, and on the way the bee sung a funny little song like this: "I buzz, buzz, buzz all day long. I make my honey good and strong. I fly about to every flower, and sometimes stay most half an hour." Uncle Wiggily didn't know whether or not the bee was really in earnest about what he said, but surely enough, when they got to the ice cream store, the man took the bee's honey and handed out 4 ice cream cones, each larger than the first ones. 2 were for the duck, as he was so fond of them.
"Oh, let's eat them here, so that if the bear meets us he can't take them away," suggested Grandfather Goosey, and they did. Then the bee flew home to his hive, and Uncle Wiggily and the old gentleman duck found a nice place to sleep under a haystack. In the morning Grandfather Goosey said he thought he had better go back home, as he had traveled enough. He wanted the rabbit to come with him, but Uncle Wiggily said: "No, I have not yet found my fortune, and until I do, I will keep on traveling." So he kept on, and the duck went home. Well, it was about 2 days after that, when, along toward evening, as Uncle Wiggily was walking down the road, he saw a real big house standing beside a lake. Oh, it was a very big house, about as big as a mountain, and the chimney on it was so tall as almost to reach the sky. I wonder who lives there," said Uncle Wiggily. "Perhaps I can find my fortune in that house." "Oh, no, never go there!" cried a voice down in the ground, and looking toward his toes, Uncle Wiggily saw a little red ant. "Aha! Why shouldn't I go up to the big house, little red ant?" asked the rabbit. "Because a monstrous giant lives there," was the answer, "and he could eat you up at one mouthful. So stay away." "I guess I will," said the rabbit. "But I wonder where I can sleep to night. I guess I'll go—" "Oh, look out! Look out!" cried another red ant. "There is the giant coming now." Uncle Wiggily looked, and he saw something like a big tree moving, and that was the giant. Then he felt the ground trembling, as if a railroad train was rumbling past, and he heard a noise like thunder, and that was the giant walking and speaking. "I smell rabbits! I smell rabbits!" cried the giant. "I must have them for supper."
Then he came on straight to where Uncle Wiggily was, but he hadn't yet seen him. "Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do?" cried the bunny. "Let me hide behind that stone." He made a jump for a rock, taking his valise and crutch with him. But the first red ant said: "Oh, it is no good hiding there, Uncle Wiggily, for the giant can see you." "Oh, what shall I do?" he asked again, trembling with fear. "I know!" cried the second little red ant. "Let's all bring grains of sand and cover Uncle Wiggily up, leaving just a little hole for his nose so he can breathe. Then the giant won't see him. It will be like down at the seashore, when they cover people on the beach up with the sand." "Oh, it will take many grains of sand to cover the rabbit," said the first red ant, but still they were not discouraged. The first 2 ants called their brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and papas and mammas and cousins and nephews and 42nd granduncles. Soon there were 22,467,891 ants and a little baby ant, who counted as a half a one, and he carried baby grains of dirt. Then each big ant took up a grain of sand, and then they all hurried up and put them on Uncle Wiggily, who stretched out in the grass. Now all those ants together could carry lots of sand, you see, and soon the rabbit was completely buried from sight, all but the tip of his nose, so he could breathe. And when the giant came stumbling by, he couldn't see the bunny, and so he didn't eat him. And of course the giant didn't eat the ants either, for he didn't like them.
I thought I smelled a rabbit, but I guess I was mistaken," said the giant, grumbling and growling as he tramped around.
And that's how Uncle Wiggily was saved, and pretty soon, if there isn't any sand in my rice pudding, I'll tell you about Uncle Wiggily and the bad giant. End of story 27.
Story 28 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 28. Uncle Wiggily and the Bad Giant. Do you remember about the giant of whom I told you a little while ago, and how he couldn't find Uncle Wiggily because the rabbit was covered with sand that the ants carried? Yes, I guess you do remember. Well, now I'm going to tell you what that giant did. At first he was real surprised because he couldn't find the bunny rabbit, and he tramped around making the ground shake with his heavy steps, and growling in his rumbling voice until you would have thought it was thundering. My, growled the giant. To think that I can't have a rabbit supper after all. Oh, I'm so hungry that I could eat 14,787 rabbits and part of another one. But I guess I'll have to take a barrel of milk and a wagon load of crackers for my supper. So that's what he did, and my, how much he ate! Well, after the giant had gone away, Uncle Wiggily crawled out from under the sand, and he said to the ants, I guess I'd better not stay around here, for it is too dangerous. I'll never find my fortune here, and if that giant were to see me, he'd step on me, and make me as flat as a sheet of paper. I'm going. But wait, said the biggest ant of all. You know there are two giants around here. One is a good one, and one is bad. Now if you go to the good giant, I'm sure he will help you find your fortune. I'll try it, said the rabbit. Where does the good giant live? Just up the hill in that house where you see the flag, said the big ant, as she ate 2 crumbs of bread and jam. That's where the good giant lives. You must go where you see the fluttering flag, and you may find your fortune. I will, said Uncle Wiggily. I'll go in the morning, the first thing after breakfast. So the next morning he started off. But in the night something had happened, and the rabbit didn't know a thing about it. After dark the bad giant got up, and he went over and took the flag from the pole in front of the house of the good giant, and hoisted it up over his own house. I haven't any flag of my own, said the bad giant, so I will take his. For you see the two giants lived not far apart. In fact, they were neighbors, but they were very different, one from the other, for one was kind, and the other was cruel. So it happened that when Uncle Wiggily started to go to the giant's house, he looked for the fluttering flag, and when he saw it on the bad giant's house, he didn't know any better, but he thought it was the home of the good giant. Well, the old gentleman rabbit walked on and on, having said good-bye to the ants, and pretty soon he was right close to the bad giant's house, but all the while he thought it was the good giant's place, so don't forget that. I wonder what sort of fortune he'll give me, thought the rabbit. I hope I soon get rich, so I can stop traveling, for I am tired. Well, as he came near the place where the bad giant lived, he heard a voice singing, and the song, which was sung in a deep, gruff, grumbling, growling voice, went something like this. Oh, bing, bang, bung, look out of the way for me, for I'm so mad, I feel so bad, I could eat a hickory tree. Oh, snip, snap, snoop, get off my big front stoop, or I'll tear my hair in wild despair, and burn you with hot soup. My, that's a queer song for a good giant to sing, thought Uncle Wiggily, but perhaps he just sings that for fun. I'm sure I'll find him a jolly enough fellow when I get to know him. Well, he went on a little farther, and pretty soon he came to the gate of the castle where the bad giant lived. The rabbit looked about and saw no one there, so he kept right on, until all of a sudden he felt as if a big balloon had swooped down out of the sky and had lifted him up. Higher and higher he went until he found himself away up toward the roof of the castle, and then he looked and he saw 2 big fingers, just as big as a trolley car, holding him just as you would hold a bug. "Oh, who has me?" cried Uncle Wiggily, very much frightened. "Let me go, please. Who are you?" "I am the bad giant," was the answer, "and if I let you go now, you'd fall to the ground and be killed. So I'll hold on to you." "Are you the bad giant?" asked the rabbit. "Why, I thought I was coming to the good giant's house. Oh, please let me go." "No, I'm going to keep you," said the giant. "I just took the good giant's flag to fool you. Now let me see. I think I'll just sprinkle sugar on you and eat you all up. No, I'll use salt. No, I think pepper would be better. I feel like pepper today." So the bad giant started toward the cupboard to get the pepper caster, and poor Uncle Wiggily thought it was all up with him. "Oh, I wish I'd never thought of coming to see any giant, good or bad," the rabbit gentleman said. "Now good-bye to all my friends." Let me see," spoke the bad giant, standing still. "Pepper. No,
I think I'll put some mustard on you. No, I'll try ketchup. No, I mean horseradish. Oh dear, I can't seem to make up my mind what to flavor you with." And he held Uncle Wiggily there in his fingers, away up about 100 feet high in the air, and wondered what he'd do with the old gentleman rabbit. And it's a good thing he didn't eat him right away, for that was the means of saving Uncle Wiggily's life. Right after breakfast the good giant found out that his bad neighbor had taken his flag, so he went and told the ants all about it. "Oh, then Uncle Wiggily must have been mixed up about the flag, and he has gone to the wrong place, and he'll be eaten," said the big ant. "We must save him. Come on, everybody." So all the ants hurried along together, and crawled to the castle of the bad giant, and they got there just as he was putting some molasses on Uncle Wiggily to eat him. And those ants crawled all over the giant, on his legs and arms and nose and ears and toes, and they tickled him so that he squiggled and wiggled and squirreled and whirled, and finally he let Uncle Wiggily fall on a feather bed, not hurting him a bit. And the rabbit gentleman hopped safely away, and the ants crawled with him far from the castle of the bad giant. So Uncle Wiggily was saved by the ants, and in case the trolley car doesn't run over my stick with peppermint candy, and make it look like a lollipop, I'll tell you soon about Uncle Wiggily and the good giant. End of story 28. Story 29 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. Story 29. Uncle Wiggily and the Good Giant. Now, what do you s'pose that bad giant had for supper the night after the ants helped Uncle Wiggily get away? You'd never guess, so I'll tell you. It was beans, just baked beans, and that giant was so disappointed, and altogether so cut up about not having rabbit stew, that he ate so many beans that I'm almost afraid to tell you just how many. But if all the boys in your school were to take their bean shooters and shoot beans out of a bag for 1,000,000 years and 4th of July also, that giant could eat all of them, and more too, that is, if he could get the beans after the boys shot them anyway. "Well, I certainly must be more careful after this," said Uncle Wiggily to the ants, as they crawled along down the hill with him, when he hopped away from the bad giant's house. "Oh, it wasn't your fault," said the second size big red ant, with black and yellow stripes on his stockings. "That bad giant changed the flags, and that's what fooled you. But I guess the good giant will have his flag back by to morrow, and then you can go to the right house. We'll go along and show you, and you may get your fortune from him." So surely enough, the next day, the good giant went over, and took his flag away from the bad giant, and put it upon his own house. "Now you'll be all right," said the pink ant with purple spots on his necktie. "You won't make any mistakes now, Uncle Wiggily. I'm sure the good giant will give you a good fortune." "Yes, and he'll give you lots to eat," said the black ant with white rings around his nose. Well, Uncle Wiggily took his valise and his crutch, and up toward the good giant's house he went, with the ants crawling away in the sand to show him the way. Pretty soon they came to a big bridge over a stream of water, and this was the beginning of the place where the good giant lived. "We'll all have to go back now," said the purple ant with the green patchwork squares on his checks. "And if we crossed over the bridge we might fall off and be drowned. We'll go back, but you go ahead, and we wish you good luck, Uncle Wiggily." "Indeed we do," said a white ant with gold buckles on her shoes. Well, after a little while Uncle Wiggily found himself right inside the good giant's house, and oh, what a big place it was! Why, even the doormat was so big that it took the rabbit 3 hops to get to the top of it. And that front door, I wish you could have seen it. It was as large as one of your whole houses, and it was only a door, mind you. "Hello! Hello!" cried Uncle Wiggily, as he pounded with his crutch on the floor. "Is any one at home?" But no one answered, and there wasn't a sound except the ticking of the clock, and that made as much noise as a railroad train going over a bridge, for the clock was as big as a church steeple. No one is home," said Uncle Wiggily. "I'll just sit down and make myself comfortable." So he sat down on the floor by the table that was away over his head, and waited for the giant to come back. And, all of a sudden, the rabbit heard a noise like a steam engine going, and he was quite surprised, until he happened to look up. And there stood a pussy cat as big as a cow, and the cat was purring, which made the noise like a steam engine. "My, if that's the size of the cat, what must the giant be?" thought the rabbit. "I do hope he's good-natured when he comes home."
Well, pretty soon, in a little while, as Uncle Wiggily was sitting there, listening to the big cat purr, he felt sleepy, and he was just going to sleep when he heard a gentle voice singing: "Oh, see the blackbird sitting in the tree, hear him singing, jolly as can be. Now he'll whistle a pretty little tune. Isn't it delicious in the month of June? Hear the bees a buzzing hour by hour, gathering the honey from every little flower. The katydid is singing by his own front door, and I'll have to stop this song, I don't know any more." "Well, whoever that is, he's a jolly chap," said the rabbit, and with that, who should come in but the giant himself. "Ho, ho! Whom have we here?" the giant asked, looking at Uncle Wiggily. "What do you want, my little furry friend with the long ears? You must be able to hear very well with them." "I can hear pretty well," said the rabbit, "but I came to seek my fortune." "Fine!" cried the good giant, for he it was. "I'll do all I can for you," and he laughed so long and hard that part of the ceiling and the gas chandelier fell down. But the giant caught them in his strong hands, and not even the pussy cat was hurt. Then the giant sung another song, like the first, only different, and he fixed the broken ceiling, and said: "Now for something to eat, then we'll talk about your fortune. I'll get you some carrots." So he went out, and pretty soon he came back carrying 10 barrels of carrots in one hand and 17 bushels of cabbages in the other. "Here's a little light lunch for you," he said to Uncle Wiggily. "Eat this, and I'll get you some more when we have a regular meal." "Oh, why, this is more than I could eat in a year," said the rabbit, "but I thank you very much." So he nibbled at one carrot, while the good giant ate 15,708 loaves of bread and 2,000,000 bushels of jam. Then he felt better. "So you want to find your fortune, eh?" the giant said to the rabbit. "Well, now, I'll help you all I can. How would you like to stay here and work for me? You have good ears, and you could listen for burglars in the night when I am asleep. Will you?" "I think I will," said Uncle Wiggily. And he was just reaching for another carrot, when suddenly from outside sounded a terrible racket.
"Where is he? Let me get at him. I want him right away. That rabbit, I mean," cried a voice, and Uncle Wiggily jumped up in great fright, and looked for some place to hide. The giant jumped up, too, and grabbed his big club. But don't be alarmed. Nothing bad is going to happen to our Uncle Wiggily. In fact, he is going to have lots of fun soon. So if my motor boat doesn't turn upside down and spill out the pink lemonade, I'll tell you in the next story about Uncle Wiggily and the giant's little boy. End of story 29. Story 30 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures by Howard R. Garris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 30, Uncle Wiggily and the Giant's Boy. Let me see. I believe I left off where Uncle Wiggily was in the house of the good giant, and the old gentleman rabbit heard a terrible noise. Didn't I? "My goodness!" exclaimed the rabbit, jumping up so quickly that he upset one of the giant's toothpicks, on which he had been sitting for a chair, for the giant's toothpicks were as large as a big chestnut tree. "My goodness!" cried Uncle Wiggily. "What in the world was that?" "I guess it's my little boy coming home from school," said the good giant as softly as he could. But, even then, his voice was like thunder. "He must have heard that you were here." "Will he hurt me? Does he love animals?" asked the rabbit, for he was getting frightened. "Will your little boy be kind to me?" "Oh, indeed he will!" cried the good giant. "I have taught him to love animals, for you know he is so big and strong, even though I do call him my little boy, that it would be no trouble for him to take a bear or a lion, and squeeze him in one hand so that the bear or lion would never hurt anyone any more. But, just because he is big and strong, though not so big and strong as I am, I have taught my boy to be kind to the little animals." "Then I will have no fear," said Uncle Wiggily, winking his nose. I mean his eyes. And just then the door of the giant's house opened and in came his little boy. Well, at first Uncle Wiggily was so frightened that he did not know what to do. I wonder what you would say if you were suddenly to see a boy almost as big as your house, or mine, walk into the parlor and sit down at the piano. Well, that's what the old gentleman rabbit saw. "Ah, my little boy is home from school," said the giant kindly. "Did you have your lessons, my son?" "Yes, father, I did," was the answer.
and I learned a new song. I'll sing it for you." So he began to play the piano with his little fingernail, and with all that, he made as much noise as a circus band of music can make on a hot day in the tent. Oh, he played terribly loud, the giant's boy did, and Uncle Wiggily had to put his paws over his ears, or he might have been made deaf. The giant's little boy sang, and even when he hummed it, the noise was like a thunderstorm, only different. Now, this is the boy giant's song, and you will have to sing it with all your might as hard as you can, but not if the baby is asleep. "I am a little fellow, but soon I will grow big, and then I'll sit beside the sea, and in the white sand dig. I'll make a hole so very deep, to China it will go, and then I'll fill it up with shells, wherein the wild waves blow." And with that, the giant's little boy banged so hard on the piano with his little fingernail that he broke a string and made a funny sound, like a banjo out of tune. "Oh, I didn't mean to do that," the giant's boy cried. "I'm sorry." "Dear me, I wonder when you'll grow up?" asked the giant, sort of sad like. "I think he's pretty big now," said Uncle Wiggily, and indeed the boy giant was so tall that when the rabbit stood up as high as he could stand, he only came up to the tip end of the shoelaces on the giant boy's big shoes. "Oh, he grows very slowly," said the giant, and then the boy noticed the rabbit for the first time. Well, that boy giant wanted to know all about Uncle Wiggily, where he came from, and where he was going, and all that, and Uncle Wiggily told about how he was traveling around to seek his fortune. "Oh, I believe I know where you can find lots of money, Uncle Wiggily," said the giant's boy kindly, as he reached over and stroked the rabbit's ears. "I have always heard that there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The next time we see one, you and I will go out and search for the money. Then you will have your fortune, and you won't have to travel any more." "That will be fine!" cried the rabbit. "For, to tell you the truth, I am getting pretty tired of going about the country. Still, I will not give up until I find my fortune." "All right, but we will have to wait until it rains, and then we'll see where the end of the rainbow is," said the giant's boy. "Now we will have some games together. Let's play tag." Well, they started to play that, but land's sake! Flopsy, Dub and a basket of ice cream cones. Uncle Wiggily ran here and there and everywhere, and he jumped and leaped about so that the giant's little boy couldn't catch him, for the big little fellow wasn't very spry on his feet. "Oh, I guess we had better not play that game any more," said the boy giant, as he accidentally nearly stepped on Uncle Wiggily's left ear. "I might hurt you. Let's play hide and go seek." But Uncle Wiggily was even better at this game than he had been at tag, for he could hide in such small holes that the boy giant couldn't even see them. So, of course, that wouldn't do for a game. It was no fun. Then all at once it began to rain. My, how it did pour! It rained snips and snails and puppy dogs' tails, with the puppies fast to the tails, of course, and the streets were covered with them. Then it rained a few ice cream cones, and Uncle Wiggily and the giant boy had all they wanted to eat, the giant eating 14,786, and part of another one, while Uncle Wiggily had only 2 cones. "Oh, there is the rainbow!" cried the boy giant at last, and he saw the beautiful gold and green and orange and red colors in the sky. Now for the pot of gold! So he and Uncle Wiggily started off together to find it, but they had not gone very far through the woods before they met the papa giant. "Where are you going?" he asked of them. "To the end of the rainbow to get the pot of gold," said the giant's little boy. "You don't need to," said the giant, "for there is none there. That is only a fairy story. Wait, I'll show you." So he stretched out his long arm as far as it would go, and he reached away down to the end of the rainbow, and he felt all around with his long fingers, and sure enough, there wasn't a bit of gold there, for his hand came back empty. "It's too bad," said the giant's little boy to Uncle Wiggily. "There is nothing there for you, but perhaps you will find your fortune to morrow. Come and stay with me until morning." So Uncle Wiggily went back to the giant's house, and the next day quite a surprising adventure occurred to him. And in case the gasoline in my motor boat doesn't wash all the paint off my red necktie, I'll tell you next about Uncle Wiggily and Granddaddy Longlegs. End of story 30. Story 31 of Uncle Wiggily's Adventures. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 31. Uncle Wiggily and Daddy Longlegs. Uncle Wiggily got up early the morning after the good giant had shown him that there wasn't any gold at the end of the rainbow. The old gentleman rabbit looked where a place had been set for him at the table, but alas and alack a day, the table was almost as high from the floor as the church steeple is from the ground, and Uncle Wiggily could not reach up.
Let's see what we will do," spoke the papa giant. "I know I'll get a spool of thread from the lady giant next door, and that will answer for a table for you, Uncle Wiggily, and you can use another toothpick for a chair."
So while the boy giant went for the spool of thread, the papa giant served Uncle Wiggily's breakfast. First he brought in a washtub full of milk and a bushel basket full of oatmeal.
"What is that for?" asked the rabbit in surprise.
"That is for your breakfast," was the answer. "Isn't it enough? Because I can get you more in a jiffy, if you want it."
"Oh, it is entirely too much," said Uncle Wiggily. "I can only take a little of that oatmeal."
"Very well, then, I will take this myself, and get you a small dishful," spoke the papa giant, and he ate all that oatmeal and milk up in one mouthful. But even then it was hardly enough to fill his hollow tooth. Then the boy giant came back with the spool, which was as big as the dining room table in a rabbit's house. Up at this new table the traveling uncle sat, and he ate a very good breakfast indeed. "Now I must start off again to seek my fortune," he said, as he took his crutch, striped red, green and yellow, like a cow's horn. Oh, excuse me! I was thinking of circus balloons, I guess. Anyhow, Uncle Wiggily took his crutch and valise, and, as he was about to start off, the boy giant said: "I will walk along a short distance with you, and in case any bad animals try to hurt you, I'll drive them away." "Oh, I don't believe any one will harm me," spoke the rabbit, but nevertheless something did happen to him. As he and the boy giant were walking along, all of a sudden there was a noise from behind a big black stump, and out jumped a big black bear. He rushed right at the rabbit and called out:
"Ha! Now I have you. I've been waiting a long while for you, and I thought you'd never come. But better late than never. Now for my dinner. I've had the fire made for some time to cook you, and the kettle is boiling for tea."
He was just going to grab our Uncle Wiggily, when the giant's little boy called out: "Here, you let that rabbit alone. He's a friend of mine." But listen to this. The bear never thought a thing about a boy giant being with Uncle Wiggily, and he never even looked up at him. Only when the bear heard the giant's boy speaking he thought it was distant thunder, and he said:
"Oh, I must hurry home with that rabbit before it rains. I don't like to get wet."
"Yes, I guess you will hurry home!" cried the giant's boy, and with that he reached over, and he grabbed that black, ugly bear by his short, stumpy tail, and he flung him away over the treetops, like a sky rocket, and it was some time before that bear came down, and when he did, he didn't feel like bothering Uncle Wiggily any more. "Now I guess you'll be all right for a while on your travels," said the boy giant as he called good by to the old gentleman rabbit. "Send me a souvenir postal when you find your fortune, and if any bad animals bother you, just telephone for me, and I'll come and serve them as I did the bear." Then the old gentleman rabbit thanked the boy giant and started off again. He traveled on and on, over hills and down in little valleys, and across brooks that flowed over green, mossy stones in the meadow. And pretty soon Uncle Wiggily came to a big gray stone in the middle of a field, and as he looked at the stone, the old gentleman rabbit saw something red fluttering behind it, and he heard a noise like someone crying. "Ha! Here is where I must be careful!" exclaimed the rabbit to himself. "Perhaps that is a red fox behind the stone, and he is making believe cry so as to bring me up close, and then he'll jump out and grab me. No, indeed, I'm going to run back." Well, Uncle Wiggily was just going to run back, when he happened to look again, and there, instead of a fox behind the stone, was a little boy, with red trousers on, and he was crying as hard as he could cry, that boy was. "What is the matter, my little chap?" asked the rabbit kindly. "Are you crying because you have on red trousers instead of blue? I think red is a lovely color myself. I wish I had red ears as well as red eyes." "Oh, I am not crying for that," said the little boy, wiping away his tears on a big green leaf. "But you see I am like Bo Peep, only I have lost my cows instead of my sheep, and I don't know where to find them." "Oh, I'll help you look," said Uncle Wiggily. "I am pretty good at finding lost cows. Come, we'll hunt farther." So off they started together, Uncle Wiggily holding the little boy by one of his paws, one of the rabbit's paws, I mean. Well, they looked and looked, but they couldn't seem to find those cows. They looked at one hill, and on top of another hill, and down in the hollows, and under the trees by the brook, but no cows were to be seen. "Oh, dear!" cried the little boy. "If I don't find them soon there'll be no milk for dinner." "And I am very thirsty, too," said the rabbit. "I wish I had a drink of milk. But where in the world can those cows be?" And he looked up into the sky, not because he thought the cows were there, but so that he might think better. Then he looked down at the ground, and as he did so he saw a little red creature with 8 long legs, and the creature wiggled one leg at the rabbit friendly like as if to shake hands. "Why don't you ask me where the cows are?" said the long-legged insect. "Why, can you tell?" inquired Uncle Wiggily. "Of course I can. I am Granddaddy Longlegs, and I can always tell where the cows are," was the reply. "Just you ask me." So Uncle Wiggily and the little boy, both together, politely asked where they could find the cows, and the granddaddy just pointed with one long leg off toward the woods, where the rabbit and boy hadn't thought of looking before that. "You'll find your cows there," said Granddaddy Longlegs, and then he hurried home to his dinner. And Uncle Wiggily and the boy went over to the woods, and there in the shade by a brook, sure enough were the cows, chewing their gum, I mean their cuds, and they were just waiting to be driven home. So Uncle Wiggily and the boy with the red trousers drove the cows home, and they were milked, and the old gentleman rabbit had several glasses full, glasses of milk, not cows, you know. Goodness me, a cow couldn't get into a glass, could it? I guess not. And after that, Uncle Wiggily Well, but see here now. I think I've put enough adventures about Uncle Wiggily in this book, and I must save some for another one. So I think I will call the following book Uncle Wiggily's Travels, for he still kept on traveling after his fortune, you know. And he found it, too, which is the best part of it. Oh, my, yes, he found his fortune all right. Don't worry about that. And in the next book, the very first thing he did was to have an adventure with a red squirrel girl who was some relation to Johnnie and Billie Bushytail. So that's all there is to Uncle Wiggily for a little while, if you please. But if you want to hear anything else about him, I'll try, later on, to tell you some more stories. And now, dear children, good bye. The end.